Every time you click or stream a show or ask an AI a question, all of that is powered by this massive, totally hidden infrastructure. So today, we're going to dive deep into the huge environmental price tag of our digital world. And we're going to look at an almost sci-fi solution that is, well, literally making waves.
I mean, it sounds absolutely crazy, right? Taking all this super sensitive trillion-dollar electronics and just plopping it in salt water? But you're about to see how this wild idea might actually be one of the most important keys to making our digital world a little more sustainable. Okay, so let's get right to the problem. The engines that power the internet, these giant server farms we call data centers, they are just incredibly thirsty. I'm talking about staggering amounts of energy, and maybe even more important, fresh water. And here's the real kicker, the big irony. A lot of these server farms are built in the middle of deserts. Why on earth would they do that? Well, it's because the dry air is better for the equipment, less humidity damage, but the result is this direct battle. It's big tech versus basic human needs like farming and just having enough water to drink. So where's all that energy even going? Get this, a massive 40% of a typical data center's power bill has nothing to do with computing. Nope, it's just for cooling. It's all spent on these huge, gigantic chillers and water systems just to keep the servers from, literally melting down. All right, so if cooling is the big problem, what if you could just get rid of those energy-guzzling chillers completely? And that brings us to this radical solution, using the natural, deep, freezing cold of the ocean itself. And the engineering behind it is actually brilliantly simple. Instead of using a ton of electricity to make fresh water cold, you just pump cold seawater through this closed system of pipes. These pipes, they basically act like a radiator for the servers, pulling the heat right off them and carrying it away. Just like that. No evaporation, no massive chillers, gone. And the impact of this one simple change, it's staggering. A Chinese company called Yun, who's a really big player here, says their underwater data centers use at least 30% less electricity than the ones on land. I mean, that is a huge savings, not just in money, but in their carbon footprint too. But this idea didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was actually pioneered, believe it or not, over a decade ago by an American tech giant. They were the ones who proved this whole concept wasn't just some crazy theory. It could actually work in the real world. So the story really kicks off back in 2018. That's when Microsoft launched something called Project Natick. They literally sank a container packed with servers off the coast of Scotland. 2 years go by, they pull it up and declare it a huge success. But then they kind of just stopped. And that's when China's Yun grabbed the idea and just ran with it, going from a small pilot to a massive commercial project in just a couple of years. And what's really interesting is that Project Natick was successful in ways they didn't even expect. They found they had way fewer broken servers than a normal data center on land. See, the capsule was sealed and filled with nitrogen, which doesn't corrode things like oxygen does. Plus, with no people around to accidentally bump into stuff, the hardware was just safer. It turned out to be more reliable because it was all alone down there. And this is where the story gets really interesting. If it was such a home run, more reliable, use less energy, why did Microsoft pump the brakes? Right now, they just call it a research platform. And that basically left the door wide open for companies like Yun to take the technology that Microsoft proved worked and actually turn it into a business. So here's the deal. While this solution sounds amazing and it is incredibly promising, it's not a silver bullet. There are risks involved. We really have to look at the whole picture, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The benefits, sure, but also the potential environmental and even security problems. Okay, on the one hand, the pros are pretty obvious. You save a ton of electricity, you don't use a single drop of fresh water, and the servers actually break less often. But on the other hand, there are some serious concerns. Like, could the warm water being pumped out create these little hot spots in the ocean that harm marine life, especially during a heat wave? And what about security? Could these things be vulnerable to new kinds of attacks, maybe even using sound to sabotage them? Now, for their part, Yun says the environmental impact is tiny. They point to data from a test unit, and a spokesperson said that the temperature of the water around it only went up by less than 1 degree. They claim that's not enough to cause any real harm. It's a pretty critical claim, and you can bet it's going to get a lot more attention as these projects get bigger and bigger. Which, of course, brings us to the really big question here. Is this whole underwater data center thing just a niche idea that only works in a few places? Or are we actually watching the start of a massive global shift in how we build the internet? Well, it definitely looks like China isn't the only one thinking about this. Other coastal countries are absolutely paying attention. South Korea has already announced its own plans for underwater projects. And at the same time, Japan and Singapore are looking at a slightly different take, data centers that actually float on top of the ocean. So yeah, the race is definitely on. So when you think about it, our need for data, for the cloud, for AI, it's just growing like crazy, almost exponentially. And that makes the question of where we're going to put all this hardware more and more urgent. Are we just going to keep putting more and more strain on our land and our fresh water? Or is the future of the internet hiding somewhere totally unexpected, maybe miles and miles beneath the waves?